Hello, my name is Chuck Wolf. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I've been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station, WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolf@cjwolf.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. This is WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. For everybody that's a regular listener, it's so nice to have you back. And for anybody that's a new listener, the show is about helping people deal with emotionally challenging situations in their life. Some of the shows that I do are call-ins, as many of you who are regular listeners know. You call in, I walk you through this idea of there's an emotion roadmap that helps you to feel the way you need to feel, want to feel, what's ideal for you to feel. I help you to figure that out for you and for others that you're dealing with. One of the things that I do sometimes is I have thought leaders, people I think that are really, really exciting to talk to because they're so good at being able to use the idea of incorporating emotional intelligence in their everyday activities. And one of those people that I've had the pleasure to get to know and to work with is Emilie Nketiah, who is working at Transdev now, and she has become a vice president. And she can tell you a little bit about her career and how it's grown, in part because of all the skills that she had when I first met her, as well as some of the things that she's learned along the way. Now, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to use the show to try to emphasize to everybody that's listening how it's possible that you might take what's available to us in this new science of emotional intelligence with the particular technique that I created called an emotion roadmap. And for those of you that are new to this idea, what happens to people, in my experience, is smart people get stuck. Really good critical thinkers, really effective problem solvers, they often get stuck when something emotional is happening, either inside them, and they're concerned about how they're going to feel if they act a certain way, and they have choices they have to decide, and they're really confused about which choice is best because of the emotional contagion that's involved in whatever it is they're feeling or dealing with. But it's also true that sometimes they're worried about the emotions in somebody else, whether it's someone you work for, someone you work alongside, someone who works for you, or it's someone at home. Because a lot of our emotional challenges aren't just at work, of course, they're also at home. But one of the things that I emphasize in this program is to try to give people tools and ways to be smarter about how they deal with emotionally challenging situations. And I try to incorporate this emotion roadmap and teach it to people who are listening regularly. And one of the chances I had to meet Emilie was when one of my colleagues, Estelle Marin, invited me to come up as a guest speaker in her classroom at HEC in Montreal, and also to have a paid opportunity to speak to a whole bunch of coaches in an early morning session up in Montreal. And we filled the room. I was surprised to see over 100 some people at 7 in the morning show up, and we had quite a few people. But before that, I had a chance to go into Estelle's classroom, and while not everybody is fluent in English, everybody sort of understood when I spoke. And then I asked people, do you have questions? And I think even before I asked people if they had questions, Emilie had her hand up. And Emilie had not only questions, but she had answers. She was one of those people that just, she kept asking questions, and they were great questions. They were great questions. And I really so enjoyed getting to see her and know her just a tiny bit in the classroom. I later asked Estelle, could Emilie come to this coaching conference that I'm going to be presenting? I'd love to have her there. And then later past that, she did come, and we had a chance to get to know each other a little bit more. And then we had the experience of working together in what is called the Mesquite certification. Mesquite, for those of you that don't know, is based on the three authors, John Mayer, Peter Salovey, and David Caruso. John's a professor of psychology at University of New Hampshire. Peter Salovey is the president of Yale University. David Caruso is a worker at Yale, but also a consultant. And the three of them had engaged me early on in the late 1990s to work with them on their ability-based model of emotional intelligence, which is rather unique. And we'll talk a bit about that too. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about the show, about emotional intelligence, and about Emilie. And then I wanted to allow Emilie to talk a lot today about some of the things that she's learned, that she's using, and that are benefiting not only her as an individual, but also the company she works for, Transdev. And so, Emilie, would you like to say a little more about who you are and your background and your company? And then we'll jump into how you've been using and learning about the emotional intelligence and the emotion roadmap.
Sure. And thank you for the introduction, Chuck. And yes, I had thousands of questions during the classroom session, and I'll share a bit later why I had all those questions and tidbits for the audience that they can dig more into, because it's just very interesting. So, in terms of, for me, my background, I studied psychology, right? Psychology, clinical psychology, have a passion for organizational development, supporting systems and structures that affect people. So, did that in terms of my academic background, did some business, did a business degree and HR degree. I'm working on my master's degree, which is where I met Chuck at ASHRC. The goal in terms of my professional development impact has always been, to have impact, but to come at it from multiple directions. So not to be an expert solely in HR, or not to be an expert solely in business, but really to look at problems from multiple, dimensions, and felt hearing about emotional intelligence offered another dimension to approach a problem by. So, so I'm having fun. I'm having fun, solving problems, using all the skills and things I've been able to pick up along my professional journey and personal one as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me in terms of professional sense. In terms of career-wise, I started in banking. I moved on to work in academia. Afterwards, I went into real estate, so multi-residential real estate, and then ended up at Transdev. And in all those roles, they were, sometimes specialists, sometimes people-oriented, customer sales, finance. But the core of it is always the same, which is impact through people. That's the continuity amongst all of them. But recently, I've taken on a more formal leadership role, directorship at Transdev, and recently been promoted to vice president at Transdev. So that comes with a whole different level of challenges around people and politics and leading and change and navigating ambiguity, working through people, working with people. So being fluent in emotional intelligence communication is a big asset. If you want to have impact and move your priorities forward, you need to know how to work with people.
So you had a choice just early on about what kind of role that you were going to take. I remember you had several opportunities offered to you. Transdev was one. You had another one with a mentor who would encourage you to go in a different direction. And so one of the first things I think when you and I were chatting was, why not pick something where you could be involved with talent management? Because where you are engaged in trying to be impactful in an organization, one of the great strengths of an organization is the talent they have. and the people they have. And if you could be involved in helping to grow talent, maintain talent, retain talent, it's a big issue for everybody today, especially in today's challenging work environment with so many staff members having so many choices about where they might go. So I guess we could start with a little bit about choosing to come to this organization and how you've actually used some of the tools that you have to actually engage the talented people at Transdev, and how some of those tools in terms of emotional intelligence have been helpful. I guess one of the things maybe to start though, Emilie, is how do you view emotional intelligence? Because a lot of people hear the words, and I mean, if you ask people, can you be emotional and intelligent at the same time? A lot of people say, well, not really, not when I think about myself anyway. When I'm emotional, I don't usually feel that intelligent. So how do you see emotional intelligence? So maybe we could just sort of start with your view of what those terms mean to you and how they actually come across to others in your organization, and how you've used it for talent management.
Of course. So emotional intelligence, honestly, I see it as a facet of wisdom, really. Right? I find if you're able to understand it, the parts of it, leverage it, I think we have better relationships. I think our projects move forward in a smoother way. I think it allows us to handle conflict in a more productive way. I think it's necessary, right? And what I've seen is that a lot of people sort of, we don't get formal training on it, right? We tend to say this person's got it, or they don't. It's binary, right? And what I like about, the Mesquite and our time together is that it's looked like as an ability, something that can grow. And that was, revolutionary, at least for me. And, my readings and the things that I've looked at, emotional intelligence always seemed like it's something you are born with or you don't have, right? It's just, it's black or white. And over the time that we've worked together, we see that's not necessarily true. Right.
Right. And I think there's different aspects to it. And the way I think about it, of course, is that, I look at there's a breakdown of those abilities, and it's not like just one big umbrella ability. There's the ability to understand how you're feeling, how I'm feeling, how people who might be listening are feeling to us. It's also the most exciting part of it to me was the idea that, there are certain feelings that are better than other feelings for getting stuff done. And when you realize that, and you realize that, hey, what I am feeling at the moment isn't one of those better feelings for what I'm trying to get done. And if I want to change that feeling, I can do that. I think that's one of the other exciting things to me is that, hey, if there are better feelings than what I might be feeling, like for instance, if I'm grieving and I've got to go be inspirational and make a motivational speech to a whole group of people that are waiting and depending on me and paying me actually to come in and do this for them. And yet I'm grieving. You can't cheat grief.
Exactly.
But can you kind of sort of put it aside somehow for the moment, at least, because you're going to have to deal with it at some point, but then go in and get done what you need to get done. And how do I then get myself to a place where I feel inspirational? I'm not making it up, but I really walk in the room feeling inspirational and I communicate that. So it's the use, and then it's understanding how emotions work, and finally managing my own emotions and other people's emotions. And all of that is, each piece is, you can be good or bad at, or it's just sort of in the middle, somewhat competent at. And so all of that I think is exciting to learn about. And I think a lot of people don't have that kind of knowledge about it. It's kind of like, it's this big umbrella piece, and the actual really parts that you can talk about that are sort of smaller abilities, if you will, tasks they call them in the model. I think it really illuminates for people where their strengths are and also where they might grow and where they can grow their abilities, as you were mentioning. And I've seen you do all those things, actually.
Absolutely, Chuck. That's part of the breakdown. I think it's really 4 pillars of what you've mentioned, recognizing, using, self-management, relating with others. I was in a conversation with one of my peers, and they were getting, unpleasant feedback about their interactions with others, right? In terms of on a technical, side, they're very strong. They're able to do things technically that few are able to do. In terms of relating with others, they struggled very much so, right? So technically they're able to do certain things, but they can't mobilize people around the idea because people don't like to work with this person. So, I sat down and had a conversation with them saying, like this is some of the feedback around behaviors people have seen when it comes to you. And their response was, oh my gosh, I didn't see that, right? I didn't see that this is how, people perceive me. So we put that on the side for a second. We went into a sort of meeting together where I was able to see them interact with others so I can get my own, sample, if you want, and saw that this person could not recognize faces that are slowly getting, frustrated. They couldn't see the cues, right? So even though they might be strong at coming up with a plan to get people's buy-in, they don't see the train coming towards them, right? And that's what I like about the Mesquite is that we say people are poor at like managing emotions. No, they might be very good at handling it, but they don't see it coming. So if we can work with them to pick up cues, they can use their strength at strategic management and stuff to manage emotions with others. So that's what's powerful to me about the Mesquite is it breaks down emotional intelligence into several different types of abilities that people can work on. Right. So for them,
that's a key example of actually seeing somebody in action. Mm-hmm. As opposed to taking some kind of an assessment, but actually seeing somebody not recognize how another person might be feeling. And the consequences of that are pretty significant because you saw it in one instance, but it's probably happening a lot during the course of any and every day. And so how does that person learn then to compensate for that or to recognize that the assumption, we always have assumptions. Mm-hmm. And what is interesting is that when the Mesquite flags that somebody might not be good at this, then you ask yourself, maybe I need to challenge those assumptions. Mm-hmm. Maybe I shouldn't assume that I know what somebody is feeling in front of me. Mm-hmm. And I need other cues. I need other signals. I need other ways. I need other strategies to try and come up with. If I'm going to try to convince somebody to follow through on a plan that I've helped to create or that I'm initiating, how do I know if they're buying in? How do I know if I need to keep selling? Because sometimes people oversell, even when people have bought in. Or how do I know that I need to change the tack here because whatever I'm trying to get done with this person isn't really happening the way I was hoping it would?
Okay. So you see, like with that, absolutely agree. And what's powerful with that statement that excites me, that makes me want to work with it, is the idea that I need, I can, I want. We've moved it from it just is to I can actually do something about the situation, right? I can actually, affect change within my relationships and stuff like that. So do I need to rethink my strategy? Do I need to rethink like how but it's things that you can do as opposed to passive. And this is your skill set and it's finite and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's powerful with the Mesquite because it brings the power back to the person, the individual, to influence their context.
So one of the things that I've done, one of the things that you and I have done together is I've worked with you as a coach over time, but I also know that you've worked with others as a coach yourself inside your own organization. Can you talk at all about how any of this emotional intelligence and the emotion roadmap may have influenced some of the coaching that you've done with people internally and how it might have benefited those people in your organization?
Yeah, of course. So there's lots of examples because I think there's lots of people who need it. I think one of my first opportunities to use the emotion roadmap, I think we were working together for maybe 4 months, somewhere between April, August, and I just started at this organization in August, right? And in September, my manager at the time asked me to try and influence someone into participating in this leadership program. And the person they wanted me to influence was someone who had, strong, political relationships across the organization. So even though I was going there to try and support and influence them and stuff like that. I felt I was the one being evaluated, right? Because I'm doing it with someone who has a lot more legitimate and influential power than me in the organization. So I said, okay, well, I'm feeling nervous. I need to figure out how to approach the situation. So I said, okay, what tools do I have? I used the emotion roadmap. So I started with, how do I feel? Right? How do I feel about this situation? I'm like, okay, really bold letters, nervous, very nervous, right? And then I moved on to, okay, how do I want to feel? Well, I want to feel confident, right? And then, you keep going into, okay, how do I get there, right? And depending on how I get there, am I, able to do it, right? Am I willing to do it? So you're getting into that, and I'm like, okay, I've got my plan. And then put that aside for a second and think, okay, well, the person that I need to speak to, how might they feel when we start this conversation, right? How do I want them to feel, right? And just between the two, how might they feeling and how do I want them to feel? It influenced the title of my invitation, right? Because I want them to feel a certain way. So I might rethink how I title my calendar invite, so they've got a little bit of that feeling I want them to get when they walk into the room, right? So it's little things that you could do. And then afterwards, we talked. I thought about, okay, well, will she be willing to do it? Is she able to do it? Okay, well, this person is able to do it, but not willing. Right? So how do I, massage and work with them to get to the willing part? And also, how do I want them to feel at the end of our conversation?
Right.
So
Now, let me stop and just intervene, because I think you were told she needed to go to this leadership development program because of some challenging behaviors on her part, if I remember this correctly. Is that right?
Correct. Exactly. Right. So correct. So I needed her to believe that she wanted it too. Right. And that takes a little bit of finesse in terms of how do we get there. And, I genuinely believe that it was something that was also good for her, but you want to make sure that the person is also on board and hear their perspective. So preparing, practicing, having room for if the conversation goes in a different direction, but that's sort of, taking half an hour. I think in my case, it took me about 45 minutes to think about, to get my emotions managed and then work on what I thought her emotions might be. And when we had the conversation, it was great, right? It was the personification of, what I call you all the time, Chuck. Awesome, right? Rock star status, right? I felt like I got training, I had tools, and I went in there and I was ready and it got the outcome that I wanted. So really happy about that. And now I share the tool with other managers, something less exciting. But, I think it's helpful is when we have to thank someone for their time at an organization, right? So to spend time and think, okay, well, I need to tell someone that they no longer will be working with the organization. How do I want them to feel at the beginning? How might they be feeling, right? How do I want them to feel, right? When they're leaving the organization, how do I want them to feel at the end? So those are moments where, we use the emotion roadmap, and I like to do things in the most humane way possible, putting people first. And the exercise forces you to be empathetic. It forces you to think about how this person might be feeling and the range and the roller coaster of emotions they might be feeling. So by doing the exercise, to me, I think it forces you to think more empathetically. And that, again, I believe is powerful. And it allows us to, work better together. So I'm I'm a fan.
Well, let me tell everybody who's listening that so the exercise that you're talking about is this idea of walking through the steps in this emotion roadmap I created. So the first is you think about your situation, you think about who's key, and in this case, the last one you talked about, it's the individual that you're talking to about they're going to be leaving the organization, maybe not their first choice, and so you're going to try to figure out how they're likely to feel and how you're feeling about going in and having the conversation and what would be ideal to feel. So exactly. You go from what's likely to happen. How do you identify what the typical emotion might be when you hear a message like that? And then what would you want to feel? What would be ideal for them to feel? Is there some way to make that message sound in a way that resonates with them, in a way that they feel cared about, that they feel supported, that they feel respected, that they feel appreciated? How do you get from what's likely to be the feeling of feeling rejected or however else you might view that, to something where this conversation made me feel really good about a very difficult experience that could have really ended very poorly for me emotionally. I mean, it's not going to be a great situation necessarily anyway, but it is something that I feel like the person who told me about this and talked with me made me feel special, made me feel respected, made me feel appreciated. And I think, so when you look at that and you ask yourself, why is that helpful? Why is that structure meaningful? It's because a lot of times I think we're so caught up in our own emotional state. We're thinking about ourselves and how we want to do this. We want to be legal. We want to get this done. We want to get this over with. We want to be done with this. This is unpleasant. We just want to move forward and finish. As opposed to thinking about, well, okay, that's how I'm feeling, but I'd like to feel better than that. For this to go well, I need to feel other feelings. What would those be? And then you kind of have a conversation with yourself if you're not talking to somebody else. If you got a coach, you're talking to the coach about it. And then you come up with a feeling for yourself. And then you ask, well, what about the person I'm going to be talking to? And by the way, this works in the conversation you should. I also, when I'm teaching about this, I talk to people about every performance review, whether it's a formal one or just you just saw somebody. You know, you're evaluating a person, like you said, you went in a room with somebody, you saw how they interacted with people, and you want to have that conversation with them about the things you saw you liked, the things you saw that you did not quite understand. You want to just have a conversation to better understand why they might have done what they did, and also some things that concerned you. Mm-hmm. So when I think about conversations that are challenging conversations, I'm thinking you got a beginning where you're setting the tone. You got a middle where you're focused on the stuff that's going to be tough to talk about. And those feelings are going to be different than when you're setting the tone. And then when you're through, you want the person to feel, again, typically respected, appreciated, cared about. How do you make that happen? How do you have an emotional plan? You said when you talked, you took 45 minutes. I think in my experience, at least, I got better at this as I went along. And the more I did it, the easier it sort of got for me. When you're first doing it, it does take some time. It's kind of like one of the things I like to share with people about emotional intelligence in my mind is when you're tired and it's late at night and you get an email that's upsetting to you. You know, you get angry about it and you just type away as fast as you can with an email response, or it's a text and whatever, and you're writing back to the person. And there's a piece of you that says, this isn't the best choice of what to say in this text, but I'm tired. It's late. This person made me angry. And you send it off, and then you spend sometimes several months cleaning that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And and hopefully you learned that lesson and you don't do it again. Hopefully, but I think we often get refresher courses on that lesson, right? When we work professionally. There's one, if you allow me, Chuck, if there's one example of that I've been using recently with one of our leaders in project management, right? Using emotional intelligence, using the emotion roadmap in project management, and I think when you're leading a department or you're leading an initiative, sometimes you think, well, this is the most important initiative in the world, right? Because you are the ambassador for it. You would hope that you believe that your initiative is important, right? You're supposed to push it forward. But sometimes how we write emails, right? How we bring the project forward, the deadlines that we give to people, it's very us-centric, right? Whereas with the emotion roadmap, you can think about, okay, well, I need to leverage this other department. Let's use a concrete example like finance, right? So finance is preparing the budgets for the end of the year. Lovely. Okay. Finance needs HR, marketing, business development, maintenance, all of these departments to share their budget with them and stuff like that. But if we look at it as like finance, it's the most important thing for that person, how they might write the email, what they'll say they need, and so on and so forth. It comes off as maybe very, it's short deadlines and so on and so forth. It's just, right? Whereas for the person who is maybe in marketing, the person who is maybe in maintenance, they have other priorities that are burning that they're trying to manage. So if you want people to, do the budget or to respect your deadlines, put yourself in their position. Be like, if how do I want them to feel? Well, I don't want them to feel anxious about fulfilling the budget. But if we start with the first step, how do they feel right now? They're probably nervous. They're probably stressed. They probably have, a bunch of deadlines happening. Okay. How do I want them to feel? Okay, I want them to feel like not stressed, relaxed. This is going to be an easy process. They're supported. I can help them. Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, what do you need to do in between those two things, right? Okay, well, how you write your budget, right? How long is your email, right? How much time do you give them? It's very practical, right? Then, are you willing to do certain things, right? Are you able to do certain things, right? To really think about what tools are you offering them. So it's doing it. Rather, the emotion roadmap is very practical, right? After a while, I feel that I don't use it as explicitly to think through certain things because I've practiced that muscle, right? So you know how to do it. But there are really big, important, new discussions that sometimes I really have to sit down and say, okay, let me go through the steps because this is a tougher one, right? But after a while of using it, you've got this muscle, and the way you write your emails, the way you plan projects, the way you go about, leading in your own space, you leverage the emotion roadmap because you're asking these questions constantly, right? So it's fun stuff.
That's a great example, Emilie, because I think project management is one of those places where people don't report to you often, and yet they're responsible to you in certain ways, like with finance preparing an overall budget that needs all these other department heads to sit down and spend time and really think hard. And it's not easy necessarily to really plan effectively a real budget. I mean, sometimes you just want to take the number from last year and just add a little bit to it and not think a whole lot about it, because that's what happens to people sometimes, because they just feel like they run out of time and they don't have the skills that they need. But it's really fascinating because when you talked about that, it reminded me, I did a project with Chevron one time. Somebody was working with me, and they were the project lead for a bunch of project managers in Chevron. And Chevron had created a set of competencies that they wanted every project manager to have. And then they provide like a week-long training. But most of the project managers really never learn a lot of the skills that have to do with the relationship piece.
Of course.
When you're managing people that you have to influence, they don't report to you. How do you get people to want to respond to you? And so one of the things that we did was we used the emotion roadmap with the set of competencies, and we asked people, first of all, to rate themselves on how they felt they were impacted by these competencies. How well did they really do? And we explained to them, don't say you're good at everything, because then we can't show any progress. But we also said, but really, we just want to know, what do you feel like you're good at? And as you might expect, a lot of them felt like, these are technically brilliant people typically that are working for these organizations. And they're really challenged, though, by some of the interpersonal stuff that they got to get done. And so then the next part of the experiment, if you will, was to teach them the emotion roadmap. And to teach them how, working as a group and individually, this fellow began coaching them about how to use those competencies in the ways that were expected when Chevron created them, to learn how to use those effectively in getting things done with others by combining those competencies and the skills associated with them with the emotion roadmap. And the results were great. Results were great. So I think that, again, there's lots of ways to think about how you can use the emotion roadmap. Not as teaching somebody about something as if it's completely separate from other things you do. If it's integrated with your everyday activities, like a project management or anything you do, really, it's a performance reviews. We're towards the end of the year. Organizations are often starting to do their performance reviews if they haven't already for the year, and then they're planning going forward. Well, emotionally, those are challenging situations for the person giving it as well as the person receiving it. And so, again, I encourage people to think about how you want to feel and how you want others to feel as you're going through this experience. And then, of course, there's a lot more to it, but I think that those are some of the things that I think that have been helpful. Also, I think it influenced, I think, how you've grown in the organization, because I know when you came in, I mean, that first person you had to talk to that you shared as an example was a very influential person in the organization, and you were told to go tell her that she needs help. You need to go to this program because you need help because you're not doing stuff right. And again, who are you, Emilie?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Never a dull moment, but it helped me grow. And I think it's we were working together for, like I said, I think 4 months. And that exercise was really the culmination of everything we were learning, right? It was cementing what we were trying to do. And, for that exercise, after it ended, this person went to my leader and said, "You definitely hired the right person for the job," right? And I was like, "Oh my gosh, okay, it's a pass, right?" It's a pass. But that exercise, it took me that conversation. It really, I remember, 2 columns with all the questions. How do they feel? How do you want them to feel? Are you willing and able? And going it for me and having answers for them, and then writing out what I wanted to say and reworking it and seeing if the elements I needed were in my talking points, if you will, right? Rethinking the title of my message and the title of my invite and stuff. So it was it was an exercise, right? But an important one. And I think it was a pivotal moment for me in terms of how to use this tool, right? And now I'm able to share it with other people, and I can see them doing better. I can see them asking the right questions. And, yesterday I was at a conference, in our industry, for our industry. And it was a conference on, transit, and my piece was on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And after, the different panelists, we finished presenting on the topic, we got a question. And one of the questions was, how do you have training sessions on topics that could be very intense, right? And very, very intense, emotionally charged topics. And this person shared the example saying that, they had a training session and, 75% of participants exited the training session before the end. So that was a big deal. There are experts in diversity and equity and inclusion who I think could have maybe built a training that maybe they would have spread the intensity, right? So I question how the training was built. And I don't know if they did it in-house or they leveraged the help of an expert. But one basic thing that I think could be done to support, trainings on intense, topics is emotional intelligence, right? I find offering people this tool for how to navigate a conversation that it's tough. You feel frustrated. You want to exit. It's something, you're having an intense conversation. How's the person looking at me? Are they okay? Should I keep pushing? Can I go farther? Recognizing certain things, acknowledging how you're feeling. I really love the Pluchik model in terms of emotions, because you sort of see, okay, well, they're feeling A, but if you mix A and B, C is coming, right? So understand how emotions progress, right? And where the person is. It's stuff that I'm not sure we're offered this sort of formal training on this. When you think high school, university, I'm not sure you do. So it's work we have to do ourselves. And And I think when we do that work, we're in a better position to have productive conversations on intense topics, right? So,
Right. I think one of the things around inclusion, I've done some speaking around the topics for organizations, and it occurs to me that these are really emotional subjects for a lot of people, and it involves changing perceptions, things that people grew up with, ideas about beliefs about groups of people, our own biases, conscious or unconscious. How much are we aware of? How much are we capable of dealing with at one time? How do you deal with all the different things that are out there? Whether it's racial injustice, or dealing with LGBTQ community, or it's dealing with the idea that we should have quotas for certain groups of people. Other people shouldn't have special advantages. How do people feel who are seeing other groups get advantages? I mean, and then within certain groups, we have these assumptions that one group of people all feel the same way, and that's not true. And yet, and then we have the polarization of our political systems these days. And so I was trying to explain this to a group of people, and I said, at some point, the only way I can see that you deal with all of this is you try to open your own circle of inclusiveness to include everybody, but understand that you're not going to get it right all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I make the point. One of the things I was saying around the LGBTQIA community was that, I looked up as part of this presentation I'd made recently was this college had a sort of a definition of terms. There was 118 new terms. And I was saying, look, I'm never going to learn all those terms. You're never going to learn all those terms. But if some of those terms are meaningful to you, and I want to demonstrate I care about you, I'm going to try and learn what that means so that you and I are communicating in a way that's, that we're caring and supportive of each other. Mm. But I might get it wrong. I might not get it right. But don't make me an enemy because I didn't quite understand what you meant by this or how it's important to you. Help me learn. Work with me. Make me an ally. That's one of the terms. Mm-hmm. Don't push me away if I get it wrong. So I think there's so much that's changing for all of us right now. How do you embrace that change? How do you open your circle to be as inclusive as you possibly can? Yeah. And that's challenging for all of us.
I think it's I think with diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's this concept of work, right? That we often say, do the work. You need to do the work. You have to do the work. And I think it's on both sides, right? So for the person who is maybe not an ally yet, right? There's this, at least this is how I view it is, put effort, put in the work to understand the other, right? Try and understand what they're going through and so on and so forth. So that when you say, okay, I didn't get it right, but you tried, you know what I mean? You genuinely tried, right? I think some of the frustration is when I didn't get it right. I didn't try. You do the work to help me change. And it's like, whoa, hold on, right? Like, right. Why are we putting the onus completely on the person who is living the injustice, right? So it's that kind of balance. But right. I think with emotional intelligence, we can stay in the conversations long enough to get a solution, right? Because if you flare up or if you're frustrated and you exit, it's the end. We never get to the point where we can find solutions. So what I like about this model is because it helps with project management, it helps with conflict resolutions, it helps with D&I to be able to stay in it long enough, the uncomfortable part, right? The low, to now climb back up, right? We're getting the tools to be able to be uncomfortable long enough to see a positive change. I think we need that.
Right. And one of the things that recently you and I chatted about was this idea, I was sharing with you this model of there's a model out there that McKinsey & Company, it's a large, for people who don't know, it's one of the world's largest and best known consulting companies. And they adopted a model many years ago called the 7S model that has as its heart, superordinate goals, shared values, and then surrounding it are 6 other S's for strategy, for systems, for structure, for skill, style, and staff. Those are all ways of thinking holistically about how you impact an organization. And, one of the trends right now is this quiet quitting that people are talking about. It's not so quiet necessarily, but people are on the job, not doing as much as they could. And certainly in certain instances, just doing the bare minimum for lots of organizations. And to me, that's an emotional issue. And so I think about it, and I think about, well, if you think about the model of organizational effectiveness, the 7S model, and you think about the emotion roadmap, and you think about, well, what do I want people to feel in terms of the middle S, instead of being shared values, being shared feelings? How do I want people to feel when they think about coming to work on Sunday night? How do I want them to feel when they're at work, or when they're leaving work, when they're talking about work to other people? How do I want them to feel all the way through? Every time they think about work, I want them to feel excited, engaged, loyal, cared about, supported, respected, appreciated. How do we make those things happen across the board? And then using the emotion roadmap to say, well, what's working? That's making people feel that way. What's not working? And so you do a force field analysis or some other strategy for attacking how you want to make the change work. And so I think there's all kinds of possibilities where we can look at feelings as a lever, as opposed to something in our way when we're trying to get stuff done.
Absolutely.
I think that's a big change.
And with the 7S model and emotional intelligence and the roadmap, I would take that exercise and use it for accountability. Because when we say, there's a lot of employee engagement buzz of, we want employees to do this, and we want employees to feel this way, the employee experience, and so on and so forth. And I've got a lack of patience for flavor of the month kind of initiatives. I'm like, whatever you say you do, right? Or just keep quiet, right? Because if not, stuff. So, and, you decide what you're going to do and you stick to it. You can pivot, right? But there's some level of consistency that you need. And when you decide what you're going to do, you're also deciding what you're not going to do, right? And when we say, how do we want employees to feel? We want employees to feel A, we want employees to feel B, we want employees to feel C, D, E, F, G. Wonderful. Now let's get to that question. Are you able to do it? Very likely. Are you willing to? No, right? Are you able to do it? Maybe for certain things, yes. Maybe for certain things, your budget means no for now, right? So it's not that you're not willing. You're willing to do it. Your budget can't. So if your budget can't, maybe it's a question of going back to your team and saying, how can we do something so our budget will allow it to do it? So now for the answer to that question, am I able? Yes, because now your budget allows for it. Are you willing? Yes, maybe, right? But I like that you can have all the things that you want people to feel. You have all the things that would be ideal, but let's go back to, are you able? And are you willing?
Right. So the critical part of the roadmap is at the very end, where you say, okay, so if this is how people are feeling with this quiet quitting or whatever it might be, and this is how you want them to feel with all these wonderful feelings, how do you get from where they are, where you are, to where you want everyone to be? And then what are you actually able and willing to do? And that's the managing part of this roadmap. And I think you're right. I think a lot of times we might be willing, but we're not able because of time, money, staff. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why we might not be able to do everything we want to do. But what can you do? What moves you forward? How do you make even small steps if you can't make the big ones? So people feel like we're on track to make something special happen here.
Yeah. And then after with that, there's accountability. Right? Because I think I'm not sure where I heard it, but they're like, death by meetings. You know what I mean? There are many, many, many meetings, and thankfully, I feel like I'm fortunate that our culture, we're fast. We'll have 25 minutes, like really quick, 15 minutes in and out, right? Because we're trying to we're in growth mode, and if we've talked about it and we decided something, let's not have another meeting when something flares up and say, oh, let's talk about it again. No, hold on. This is what we talked about last time. This is what we said, right? What has changed that would change, what we agreed on last time? Because one of the things that when we do employee engagement, and a lot of people say work-life balance, yes. So stop setting up 50 meetings, right? So that person can have work-life balance, right? And holding people accountable supports in not having a bunch of meetings on the same topic. We've talked about it. Keep going, right? So it's really, walking that line that you say, this is what you want, so do it, right?
Well, I think you've demonstrated over the time I've known you, Emilie, I don't know, about a year and a half or something. I think that not only do you hold yourself accountable, but you're really, really good at holding other people accountable too.
Lack of patience on my part. That's no. But I don't think people. I fundamentally do not believe that anybody wakes up in the morning saying, "How can I make so and so's life miserable?" I do not believe that. Right. Number two, I think that people genuinely want to do the right thing. My life is better believing that. Whether it's true or false, that could be a debate. I believe people are genuinely trying to do better. And when we agree on something and then someone does something different than what we agreed on, if I believe they're genuinely trying to do the right thing and they're not trying to get under my skin, then the only other option for not doing what we said is because they forgot, they misunderstood, lack of clarity, something, because I'm believing the best in that person, right? So then when I, set up projects and stuff like that, I write their words, right? I say, okay, this question, what is your answer to the question? And, we'll be all together and I'll write down, this is what you're saying. And I'll put a dash and I'm like, this is what this person said. Like the conclusion on this topic, this is what the person said. For big major projects, not for everything, but for those type of, projects, initiatives. And I'll save it. And I'll put it in a document and I'm like, guys, this is it. So when we're 8 months into the project and there's a decision that needs to be made and so is saying no, I'm like, hold on. When we go back to where we started 8 months ago, we moved forward under the assumption that X, Y, Z. This is what you said. Your name is next to it. What has changed for your opinion to change? And then there's sort of like, oh, okay. Yeah, I did say that because it's, I think we're a lot more empathetic and sympathetic to things that are from us, right?
Right.
It's like, oh, no. It can't be a bad idea because it was my idea, right? Right. So if you see, oh, this was your name next to it, okay, so all of a sudden it's not a bad idea. I need to figure out why this was a good idea back then, right? And it's just, human behavior, and it's okay. You just really learn to work with different people, different styles, but believing the best in people. And, you write it down and you hold them accountable. I had one leader who said, Emilie, I hate it when you throw my words against me. I'm like, buddy, that's what you said, right? And we mobilized the whole world based on what you said. So, if you say blue, it's blue. And then we're able to work. We're able to do.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, as when we first started, I said we're probably going to talk, however long we talk, but we're close to the end here. So I thought it would go pretty fast. Any thoughts you want to share? Last things in terms of closing this up?
Last thoughts. Well, I think the biggest piece for me is I want to say thank you, Chuck, right? Because I got to experience, the tools you shared. I got an ally, I got a coach, right? To help me transition into a very, very different, ball game in my career, right? And it's easier to march forward when you know that you've got a really solid quarterback behind you. And for the, last little while, that's what you've been for me. So I'm grateful for it. That's what you've been to many other people in my circle, right? I'm like, you want someone amazing, find Chuck, right? And what I told you the first time we met at the conference, and I think I have our selfie, right? And I said, would you let me take a photo of you because you are my rock star, right? And that's what I said, and I stand by it. And I think there needs to be a bigger word, a more powerful word, because you were a rock star in 2020 or something, and now you've just gone so much farther. So I don't know what's the next word. higher up than Rockstar. But thank you, Chuck, for all of it. Thank you.
Well, it's great having you in my journey and my life, and I'm really appreciative that we've had a chance to spend some time together. And thanks for doing today. Thanks for being my guest on my show. And I want to thank everybody who's been listening. It's WPKN 89.5 FM, The Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And you've been listening to Emilie talk about her experiences with emotional intelligence. Thanks so much, Emilie.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.